Welcome to Detailed, an original podcast by ARCAT. This is the show where we uncover lessons learned to help you navigate your next project. I'm Cherise Lakeside, Senior Spec Writer at RDH Building Science, and your host. My guest today is Clayton Taylor, AIA, NCARB, IIDA, architect and co-founder partner at West of West Architecture and Design, an award-winning architecture and research practice with offices in Portland, Oregon, and Los Angeles, California. Clay and his partner, Jay Kumaran, forgive me if I pronounce that wrong, founded West of West in 2014, and together they lead the creative direction of the 10-person practice. Clay holds a Master of Architecture degree from the University of California and a Bachelor of Architecture degree from Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. Prior to founding West of West, he worked in high-profile design studios, including, this one's fun to say, Coop Himmelblau, Morphosis Architects, and Rios. Clay's dedication to education includes his current role as professor and guest critic at University of Oregon School of Architecture and Environment, Go Ducks, where he leads design studio courses. West of West is known for its new building and adaptive reuse designs, including multifamily housing, creative offices, and custom retail and hospitality projects in LA, New York, San Francisco, Austin, and Portland. All cities I've had the fortunate opportunity to visit. The project we are chatting about today is Eastbound in Austin, Texas. Eastbound is a 220,000 square foot office campus. The campus consists of two 4-story buildings that form a central pedestrian courtyard and a host of amenities to inspire innovation and collaboration. Now, let's get into the details. My guest today is Clayton Taylor, AIA, NCARB, IIDA, architect and co-founder / partner at West of West Architecture and Design, an award-winning architecture and research practice with offices in my hometown, Portland, Oregon, and Los Angeles, California. The project we are going to chat about today is Eastbound in Austin, Texas. Clay, welcome to Detailed. How are you today?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for taking time out of your busy day to come chat with me. I'm excited about this project. I've got this thing for concrete. So anytime I see a lot of concrete on a building, I'm like, I want to talk about that one.
That's basically the story of this project, is there was a thing about concrete from the beginning. Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, it works. So I like to start every episode with a little icebreaker question, and it's different for everybody. And so for you today, if you could be the best in the world at something, anything, what would you choose?
That's best at what I do currently would be good. That would be a pretty easy win. But I think an adjacent trait that would be really good to have or be good at, I think, might be something along the lines of like a plant whisperer, like the best plant whisperer in the world. I feel like if you can figure out plants, you can do so much with your personal and professional life for whatever reason. And my mom is a plant whisperer, and I aspire to that. So, but we also bought a bunch of plants. We're hoping they don't die in the window right now. So that's my current super skill I would like to have. So
I love that answer. Me and plants don't have indoor plants at least don't have a very good relationship. I have one plant in my house, and it was my grandma's.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I can't kill this plant. But any other plant I have in my house does. It just, I'm a plant murderer. I need to be outside. I can keep them alive. I can do all kinds of crazy things with them. But inside, I'm dead in the water.
Yeah.
So we already read your official bio in our intro. So briefly, tell me a little bit about Clay as a person. What drives your passion for architecture?
I've been kind of going through the architecture industry for quite a number of years now. Worked in LA for a while, and then ended up moving up here. Part of my passion in architecture has been a little bit of the entrepreneurial part of it, and the kind of ability to have a practice that is your own, and it can kind of navigate the world and take on the world's kind of opportunities in its own way. So I think for me, architecture's always been kind of half of the architecture kind of create as a creative act, but also kind of the way that you sculpt the practice, create a lot of projects and monitor and kind of see how those projects kind of impact the world. I think that mixture of creating and kind of analyzing your work is kind of like a really great thing for me. And that's kind of what's driven me over the years. I was lucky enough to meet my business partner in undergrad. So we've been kind of talking about having an office forever. And so it's always kind of been this slow growth to get to where we're at now. So yeah, I think that's kind of what drives my kind of professional side. Also having two little kids now, it's kind of watching them kind of take on the world for the first time. And then you kind of go back to, you're creating built environments, things like that. And you're seeing them differently as like a kid would almost again, which is kind of a fun moment in my life. But yeah, I think it's this kind of drive for me is the act of creating stuff and also seeing how it kind of fits into the world. And to me, I for architecture for me is like this kind of endless pursuit, and I think that's what's really great about it. I think for some it can maybe feel somewhat overwhelming that you're kind of constantly trying to figure things out for the rest of your life. But I think that struggle and that challenge is really, really fun. And again, yeah, I think that's kind of what has kept me going. Is every time we get a new project or a new client relationship or some other new detail, it's like a new thing to figure out, and I'm excited by that like challenge, I guess. So I also like that we don't really repeat anything and kind of just keep finding new things and new projects to take on and kind of a new way to take on the project or pursue a certain type of work. So it's been for me this like kind of constant pursuit, which I kind of call the practice, has kind of been the ethos of our firm and also just my passion in general as we kind of go through this.
It's not going to take me long to go right off the rails. It occurred to me while you were talking that one of the things, obviously I've been around maybe a little bit longer than you have, and I like to consider myself a person who doesn't have a box. I don't think outside the box. There just is no box.
Yeah.
You do whatever you need to do. But one of my struggles in our industry throughout my entire career has been how slow we are to change.
Yeah.
Especially in practice. And one of the things I'm really excited about is meeting younger professionals like you in the industry and hearing them talk. They're speaking a different language than the language I've heard for the majority of my career in firms.
Nice.
And doing this podcast, this is coming to the forefront for me more than I knew we had all these younger professionals coming into the profession because of the generational imbalance, but doing this podcast, it's becoming more and more front and center for me how the conversation is different.
Yeah.
And the goals and the motivations and the passions are different. And I'm really excited to see how our profession pole vaults forward, because that's what I'm anticipating.
Yeah, and it's something that we talk about, me and my business partner Jai, and also as an office we talk about like what is the future of our practice, and we like the size of our firm now. We have these conversations and people are kind of part of that kind of guiding of where we're going and challenging where we're going. And I think we've always been excited by that. There's a reason originally why we didn't call the practice like Kumaran and Taylor. It was intended to be not us and a creative umbrella, and I think that's always been kind of how we run it. And we like to talk about authorship and architecture and the kind of collective and how that comes together to create projects. Because it's just crazy that years ago you would only acknowledge one person who built a building, and there's like so many people and the relationships between people in the project and the project to the environment. There's just like it's such a network of things going on that it's exciting to see more kind of focus put on kind of the broader teams that are creating work. And I think we've been trying to build our practice around supporting that and trying to grow that to some degree. So that's kind of been our take a little bit is we worked around a lot for as we were younger for the other generation, and it's kind of seeing, well, how are we doing it differently and how are we improving upon that. And it's not we have any solutions, but there's an interest to pursue and change how we work. So I think it's a big thing to involve, not just, again, making projects every day, but talking about how your overall practice is kind of taking on the world to some degree. So
being that my hashtag is total world domination, I can't tell you how much I love that whole entire answer.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Eastbound.
Yeah.
Before we get into the weeds and specific project details, tell me the story. What's the background? Why did this project get built? What was the driving factor to get this project on the planet?
Yeah, so I can kind of go through the history of how we started on it, which was, it's so funny. People ask us, well, how'd you get these projects and how they happen? And for this one, it was such a random moment. We were like at breakfast on a Sunday, and I got a phone call from one of the client groups, and I was like, this is a weird number, so I just picked it up, which I'd never do.
Me neither.
Yeah, and it was like a Sunday at 10 a.m. Like, hey, this is Brad Corzin from the core group. I heard you're a friend of mine in LA. You're doing a project with them. I heard you guys are really good designers and think kind of differently about, in this case, like workplace or office design. And I was like, yeah, we're excited. And I was like, I know who Brad Corzin is. He's like, hey, here's my partner in Austin. He's got a building we're trying to figure out. So we talked about it briefly, and then like a week later, we flew to Austin for the first time. I'd never been there. And it was this kind of, they had this site. It was a nursery in East Austin. They had it under control. And I think there was like a boxing gym on it and a plant nursery. But they had control of it, and both the boxing gym and the nursery were moving on. So the land was kind of up for development, basically. And it was interesting because usually I think commercial office development doesn't happen that way. It's more of a, we were trying to put more of a story behind the project. So, and the client wanted that as well. So that first trip to Austin was just driving all around Austin and understanding kind of how things are changing and what's the difference between downtown Austin and East Austin. And, we drove I think we were driving for like 2 or 3 hours with Matt Green, who was the core associate there in Austin. And, he gave us a really good picture of where things are at and what's going on, and their interest to do an office building in East Austin that would be different and feel different and have a different kind of ethos to it than the kind of glass towers or the more high-rise stuff that's going on downtown. And for us, that was an exciting thing to have somebody say, hey, we want to go into this typology, but we really want to do it differently and think about it differently. And that makes a lot of sense for us to be involved in the project then. As a small design office, I think we're good when the kind of brief is a little weird or a little like challenging. If the brief is like, do the same thing that you've seen 5 times before, then we're probably not going to be the best team for that. But if you're trying to kind of invent something, I think that's where we're at. So basically that story or that tour of going around Austin and like understanding and kind of recognizing East Austin as it's changing was kind of the ethos or kind of the basis of our kind of project, our understanding of what we started to create as a creative brief for the project. And yeah, I think from there, it was a process of going through and really thinking about what more of an office campus can be in East Austin, something that has a lot of ground level activity. Again, the whole area is still growing around it, but we want it to feel like a campus and not just like a kind of locked down one big building. So yeah, that was kind of the base of it. We did a bunch of zoning studies, went through and figured out how to get to like a multi-building scheme. And there were some challenging things with the zoning analysis on the site that we figured out early on. And then we pitched some of these ideas of the building again, we're trying to think about the typology a little differently. There's a lot of like warehouses and kind of older big sheds that were being turned into office or creative workplace or restaurants or whatever in East Austin. So we're doing a ground up building, so we're not able to be a completely like total original warehouse shed. But the premise of it was like, what if we really did big, kind of relatively raw spaces that had just these like really large apertures of light coming in, kind of like factory glazing into a big kind of volume of space. And so we were interested in this building kind of being like a warehouse to some degree, like reminiscent of that. But it really kind of became a little bit more than that down the road. So yeah, that kind of gets us up to basically where the project started and kind of how we took it on. Yeah.
What a great, I mean, the best way to get a project, word of mouth.
Yeah.
We heard you're good. Do you want to come to a building for us?
Yeah, it was kind of. I mean, again, there was recommendations and people talking about us, which was great to hear in our reputation. But and that was early on. We started the project in 2018, so
Oh, wow.
like that early call. So that was quite a while ago, and we've grown up a lot since then. Not necessarily in size, but in complexity and everything like that of what our practice is. But at the time, we were like, wow, this is really great. I didn't know that we just get phone calls. It was the strangest thing. So.
Does that happen?
Yeah. So yeah, advice to anybody to some degree is like, if you think it might be a client, pick up the call. I think for sure, because you never know, I guess, what that number might be. So
Yeah, I figure out one of these days that's going to get me in trouble if a name doesn't pop up and it's just a number. I would say 9.9 times out of 10 I don't pick it up.
Yeah.
I would say even if a name pops up, probably 8 times out of 10 I don't pick up. Don't love the phone.
Yeah.
So broadly, paint me a verbal picture of this building and the spaces within it. We'll get into some more details, but just if I was sitting here with my eyes closed and you wanted me to visualize what this building looks like and kind of what it looks like inside, what would you tell me?
Yeah. So we start with this idea that the building is going to be an office building, but it's not going to look or feel like an office building. So, which is great. That opens up to, well, what is it? Typologically, we know the function of it, but what's the kind of feel or vibe of the whole building, and how are we going to do that? So we started with this idea of, the warehouse scaled spaces that are kind of more common to like a lower rise sort of ex-industrial kind of territory. So larger volumes, punched light coming in. So the building is created kind of around that basis. So what we did was, overall the project is about 250,000 square feet of creative office space. It's divided into 2 buildings. Each building, one's a little bigger than the other. One's about, 170, 80, and the other one's like 90,000 feet. And it was really important to split a large amount of space into 2 pieces because for us, the building needed to touch the ground really well, and it needed to build a really strong relationship from an experience standpoint from the ground into the building. So the whole idea was you're like not just going from your car into the office, but you're like moving through this kind of tight landscape piece between the 2 buildings. So visually, to imagine that it's 2 buildings right next to each other with a really tight kind of alley paseo between the 2 buildings, and that's kind of the active zone that gets you into both buildings. Kind of the other way to think about the project and describe it is sort of vertically. So the top half of the building really has these large apertures, sort of this gridded facade that wraps around it, and that's what kind of establishes this sort of warehouse take on bringing in light and fenestration, things like that. So that the top half is sort of the warehouse, and the lower half is this contrasting piece to the gridded, rigorous facade above. The lower half has these columns that are kind of leaning back and forth and dancing around. There's shaded spaces created by cuts in the building to provide zones for restaurants and outdoor seating and things like that. And that zone's generally more playful. There's also a wood soffit and some other things to that. So the idea was that when the building touches the ground, it has a very playful relationship with the landscape. It's kind of activating, doing lots of things. But as you get up into the building, it becomes a little more generally like austere, more kind of a gridded facade. So that contrast between the grid and the kind of very kind of playful columns and moments at the ground level, that's what makes something interesting and special out of this project. Is it's not one or the other. It's kind of doing both things and trying to navigate that relationship between playful ground plane and a very kind of rigorous top to the building. Generally, that's kind of the aesthetic that we were approaching, that we kind of worked through on the project. The two buildings, like I talked about, they're split. They're 4-level buildings. There's a parking garage that connects to them in the back. So collectively, you kind of get this big concrete building that has pockets and alleyways through the middle of it to kind of create that connection to the ground level. But really, we wanted it to be as efficient as we can, but also get the buildings to feel like a campus, and they're kind of talking to one another, and create some of those outdoor spaces that are captured by the negative spaces between the two buildings. All of that's kind of really great and makes a pretty straightforward project. And then Cesar Chavez cuts the project at a weird angle, and you get some really sharp points at the ends of the building, basically, is what ends up happening. So kind of mapping the site is how you get basically the kind of overall form of the project, aside from these kind of sculptural moments we're kind of cutting into and kind of pushing around in the facade, basically.
I know I'm telling you to describe it to me, but I have a picture of the building open on my other screen next to me. I have to say that besides the concrete, my thing with concrete, one of the first things that really just jumped right out at me, especially for an office building, because a lot of people don't get particularly creative with office buildings, is I love the huge windows. I love light. I love a lot of light anyway. And a lot of office buildings don't feel light and open. Square boxes, lots of, the further you get into the interior, the further you are away from any light. And I can't see how you can't have light hitting everywhere with these windows.
Well, it's kind of a funny thing because a lot of the office typology is floor to ceiling glazing, but it's almost done in a way, and usually floor to ceiling glazing, and then if you really consider the building from an energy perspective, you can't have the entire building clear glazed. It needs to have some spandrel, and because it's uninsulated basically, right? So it's interesting when you think about a clear glazed building and then a building with really large apertures. The framing of a large view for me and for this project, I feel like was more important than just going floor to ceiling with glass or something like that. It allowed the view to almost be more special when you can really like frame it and put like an edge around it. And again, we really focused on, it's about a 9 foot by 9 foot square of glazing. There's some divided lights in there. But that big chunk, when you stand next to it, it's interesting to see like it in relationship to a human kind of figure, because it's the sill's below your knee, and then the head is way above your head, so it just feels like you're standing in this big portal. So I think the frame gives it some scale in a way that makes you understand and kind of see it as a really big window. But usually you walk through office, you don't even notice because it's just floor to ceiling glazing and it's just like completely transparent. But there's something special about framing the view. Also, like I was saying, there's an energy efficiency kind of optimization of the facade where you have true solid and true void in the facade to kind of mitigate that a little bit. But also the floor to floor in the building is like 14 foot, 11 or 10, I think. So it's a really tall floor plate, which allows us to get that really big opening, and then have the concrete frame around that as well. So.
And that gives it a whole different personality. I mean, I think that's why it's not like I haven't seen a lot of glass in a lot of buildings, but it just popped. It did. It popped. It jumped right out at me. And that's not necessarily always the first thing you notice, but it just gives the building a whole different, it's a concrete building with a very warm feel, which is kind of not what you necessarily expect.
Yeah, and after going through this, that was probably one of the aesthetic struggles, is how do you get it to feel not like a brutalist building from the 70s, but like a contemporary concrete building. So we could talk more about that a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, and actually I think we're about to. So next question.
Okay.
There's a lot of concrete in this building, both inside and out. So not necessarily, just the exterior of this building, but you have it all over the place on the inside.
Yeah.
Lots of windows. So let's talk about specifically, in more specifics, the exterior enclosure design of this building.
Okay.
In a little bit more technical detail, tell me what you did here in your wall assemblies and your design of this exterior.
Yeah.
Materials that you used and why you used them, and energy efficiency, all the good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll kind of start with from a creative standpoint and how we got to the concrete facade, because I think that's kind of helpful. Especially when we're doing early, especially big projects like this, the design of the skin is a big deal for a lot of reasons, right? It's one of the more expensive parts of the project. It's the most expressive part of the project. It's also the part of the project that can really help you make an efficient envelope. And it's also the part of the building that's going to keep water out. It's like, it's funny how much stuff comes down to that surface and figuring it out. So we start a project off trying to navigate a lot of different things that are going to go into the building skin, right? So we'll try a lot of options. And this project started as a bunch of different things. There was one group of folks in the client group that was like, it should be all glass. So we tried that. There was kind of an interest on our side to look at GFRC or like a metal panel project. So we kind of went through all your classic material, except for brick, probably all your classic material options of the project. And we always really loved it. We were like, man, it'd be so great if it could be a concrete building. And there was just a question asked, I think, during one of the early meetings. We had Harvey Cleary is the contractor for the project, and they came on early and we're doing pre-con services. And for people that don't know, pre-con is normally in school, you're kind of taught, you design the project, you bid it, and then you go build it, right? Well, pre-con is covering that gap while you're still designing the project. You have a contractor kind of giving you early feedback. And on a big commercial project like this, that's extremely helpful, because we can, if I just designed a skin of the building and then sent it out for pricing at the end of CDs, I don't have any influence, or I'm not able to listen to partners who are making the project to kind of think about that. So you miss the collaborative aspect of it. So we love when the project has a pre-con agreement with a big contractor that can like take the time. And again, we're meeting like every other week. We're presenting ideas and they're like, yeah, that doesn't work. Just like gut checks on things. And for us, that's super, super important. We've built in a lot of different cities and a lot of different like types of projects. So like, we need to hear from local contractors what their buying power is or technical issues they've had on something before. So all of that stuff is a great kind of feedback. So on this project, it actually was a huge benefit to us, because I think we were in those meetings talking about that. And we threw out, what if it was concrete? And I think the contractor, or there was somebody representing them, was like, yeah, that'd be easy. And I was like, wait, what? Like, I thought you couldn't do a precast concrete facade like that. I thought that was not a thing. And I think the statement was like, well, it's in Texas, so we can do concrete all day. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. It's not California. It's not the way we think about materials in other cities for projects like this. So there was an opportunity there. And for us, that meant a lot, because especially on envelope designs like this, you're dealing with this tolerance issue of how flat can the skin of the building be. That's one end, which super flat, perfectly building, has aligned waterproofing. It's all good. It's more cost effective. It's a very simple kind of zero plane. So like all glazed buildings are kind of the straightforward way to do a facade curtain wall system. And then there's the other end, which I think a lot of the architects start with, which is, and me included, is like, how much depth can I get out of that skin surface, and how much expression and shadow and change in plane, and how far can I go with that? And so most facade projects that I've gone through, you're kind of recognizing the depth of the skin and where is this going to end up? Is it going to be a super deep skin? Is it going to get narrowed up? And the material choices in that process should influence the depth of the skin. And sometimes you're talking about 4 inches, or like 6 inches maybe, or even the thickness of a glass unit of an inch, right? So, but on this project, when we went into the precast territory, they needed more depth to pour the skin, reinforce it, and hang it and put the anchors in. So we end up dealing with like I remember coming out of the meeting, well, can we like, what do we have, like, you know, a 4-inch deep thing? Like, they're like, no, precast skin is a foot deep. So
Oh,
if you go,
wow.
yeah, so those panels end up being from the back of the panel to the outside face about a foot. And so there was a lot of discussions around, well, what can we do in that foot? Because this is a super unique opportunity to have, like, kind of out of the gate, a thicker skin in the project. And how do we use that to optimize the concrete pour in the panel system, but also how can those kind of natural ways we hang the panel and shape the panel kind of influence the pattern and the expression of the project. So that kind of that idea of making it deeper was a big deal for us. So yeah, so what we ended up doing is getting basically the expression of the project is these kind of big concrete grids, and it's about a 15 by 15 foot kind of grid. Within that, you're getting the 9 by 9 window, but between the edge of the panel and the edge of the window, there's a bunch of changes in plane and expressed edges for the concrete. And then actually, when you look at the building obliquely, all the outside of the panels are at an angle as well. So what appears to be a very straightforward graded facade from far away, when you get up close to it, which is how you're usually experiencing the building from the ground, looking very obliquely at the skin, you see the slight kind of wavering of those panels as they kind of dodge in and out a little bit. And that kind of sculptural element of the facade was a very kind of subtle thing, but it really paid off in the project, as you see the top edge of the building kind of has a bit of a kind of castellated kind of moving edge to it, basically. So yeah, there was a lot to learn in the process of going through this project. And again, the opportunity was, okay, now you're using concrete. Where can that go and why? I think that's kind of the forming of the panel a little bit. I think there's a whole discussion of color and warmth that's part of that as well. But yeah, that's pretty much how we were kind of getting through structuring the project. And then again, it's a panelized precast system, so they're basically we designed the panels, did a few rounds of that during DD. We did a really big mock-up, like a corner panel, and everyone was like, "Oh gosh, this is really cool." And then it went into production, and when they went through and hung it, basically they're poured concrete pieces, poured face down, and then the glass is installed, and then the entire panel is just hung. So kind of the installation of the skin was pretty fast. And they're 15 by 15 squares, but they're hung and they're made as double wide pieces. So they're 30 feet wide by 15 feet tall. Those big chunks just kind of tack onto the edge of the slab, kind of like a curtain wall system, but with really, really heavy anchors tying it in. So once that's done, then they're insulating the back and you're pretty much done. So it had, I think the contractor was looking at ease of construction and repeatability, because we came in saying, hey, can we get this kind of gridded facade? And they're like, well, if you're going to be that rigorous with the pattern, like, might as well just pour all the pattern, pour all of it, because you can kind of use the molds over and over, right? So there's a bunch of nuance to the corners and panels that have balconies in them, and top panels versus bottom panels. So I think it looks like a really clean grid, and like that's all the same pattern. But when you really get into the details and you start drawing all of them, there's probably, like, I don't know, 20 different panel types in the project. So yeah, it was a fun process in figuring all that out, and how you do a facade panel. And it's got to be poured in a mold and pulled out. So you can never do like a 90-degree kind of corner. It's got to have some chamfer to it to kind of be able to pop the thing out. That was all an interesting, and that was part of how we were shaping it as well. So yeah, it was an interesting thing, and I was just thinking about it the other day. I'm like, I don't know if we'll ever do a concrete facade like that again. Like it was kind of a rare moment, I feel like. But yeah, that's kind of how we went through it.
I imagine you learned a ton.
Yeah.
Looking at this, this isn't. I don't know that I would be as impressed if it was just a box. If the building was just a box, this building is not just a box.
Yeah,
there's all kinds of things going on here.
Well, that was also, again, looking at the pressures of the project. Like, once we realized we could do a deeper skin and get so much expression out of it, we could, like, that's giving you a lot of the design kind of feature of the project. So we're relying on that. And that's things that we're involving in these early discussions with the contractor. How much does it cost? What's the impact of that? the aesthetic part of like, yeah, it looks good for sure, but like, does it look good, and is it also delivering that feel to everybody that it's experiencing the project, right? Is it really kind of having the impact that it should? And the kind of sustainability measures and other things to kind of really optimize that whole system. So again, it's like one of the things that for us we've learned over the years. Like you start on the ideas of the project early, but the more you can talk to somebody who's going to be building it, um, and really listen to them and kind of take on, what do you guys need? What makes it easy for you guys to do this? That kind of negotiation, I think, is incredibly impactful to a project like this. So,
which is another thing I'm hearing. It's amazing how much your mind is opened doing, a little side gig like this and talking
yeah,
to these people from literally all over the world. But more and more, this whole thing of getting the contractor on board early and maybe losing a little bit of the historical architectural ego,
yeah,
and being more collaborative and appreciating and respecting,
yeah,
the contractors are the ones that actually build it. They have a lot of knowledge that can help inform that design early to make everything
yeah,
from pricing to construction to everything else go
yeah,
much better and end up with a better project in the end
yeah,
by
yeah.
considering that. So I love that it feels like our industry is really moving that way.
Yeah, in my brain, it's been like there's moments where you're creating and throwing ideas out there on a project, but there's also moments when you're just curating information and curating the discussion a little bit. You're trying to be a host, kind of like in your job, trying to be a host
Yeah.
to kind of how this project can come together the best way possible. And again, there's a lot of management around, do we all understand the story of this project and what we're trying to do? Like everybody, I think, knew that we weren't doing a glass office tower. We were doing something different, like a low rise creative office project. So everyone's interested in trying to discover what that can be. And I think the pursuit was correct. We didn't know where we were exactly going, right? But I think everybody from the client side, the architecture record side, and our side, and the contractor, we all kind of knew the ambitions of the project were very clear. So then it's just the time for us all to work together to figure out how we get there in the right way, which involves a lot of, there's just so many different ways to think about a building, and to think about its longevity and if it's going to function and all that kind of stuff. And, it's not just the architect being, well, it looks great proportionally, we've nailed it. But, there's just so much to that. So I think, this one and some other ones we've done of this scale, that's kind of been the way we go. Is you've got to have a little bit of a village building this thing, talking about this thing to get it to be robust enough. I think smaller projects like a house, I think it's maybe the negotiation between like a family and an architect. That's a bit of a different situation, but it's just a big thing. It's got to have a lot of voices, I think. So.
One of the things I love that I'm hearing less and less of, the more I hear about more collaborative projects and more of the project team on board early, the less and less I hear the words value engineering or
Yeah.
value analysis, or I fondly call it vulture engineering.
Yeah.
Because by the
Yeah.
time you get to that point, you don't have any choices. You have to take out things that were probably going to be game changers.
Yeah, and
in the building.
you can't react. You can't, then your fees run out, and you can't kind of rework or rethink about a project. So again, I've been through projects like that in my other in kind of past offices. Of get to that point, you're just trying to salvage the project, and it's
Right.
not fun. And then everyone's just kind of having trouble. So the earlier you can talk about, this is a big idea we have for the skin of the building. It's a huge cost. Let's talk about it. Let's say kind of where we want to go with this. What are the parameters? And then our design team actually has time to work and think about stuff a little bit, and ask questions. But sometimes if you don't have an open process like that, I think you're just like, design the building in 2 weeks and then send it out, and then we'll figure it out later. And like, oh gosh, that's just just a hard. We try to avoid that type of scenario. So yeah.
Nothing good comes of that.
Yeah.
So we may have already answered this in the last question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, and we can move on if we covered this adequately. But in your
Yeah.
project description, I troll all my guests online, just so you know that.
Nice.
You go look at the projects, just try to get a little bit of extra stuff from the information that you send me. But
Yeah.
your project description mentioned a particular fabrication method that enabled the team to calibrate and maintain the tight manufacturing and installation tolerances while accelerating the construction timeline. Now, we all know how short the construction timelines, a lot of clients get shorter and shorter and
Yeah.
shorter. And I'm hearing about more and more innovative things to reduce construction time.
Yeah.
So can you tell me what it was you did to help accelerate that construction timeline?
Yeah, I would say I don't know that there was anything really novel in that, other than going in and being like wanting to talk to the once we figured out we were doing a precast facade. We want to talk to the sub as early as we can. Like, how are they going to mold it? So it was kind of like, let's draw and plan this thing based off of what they can do. Because, we were like, oh, well, we can probably get, it's going to be hard for them to hang these panels. We got to keep them a certain size, right? And, 15 by 15 seems like really big. And then I remember coming back to me like, no, we can hang, 60 foot long by 15 foot high, something crazy. And we're like, oh, they can do way more than we think. And I think those discussions were influencing the way the facade goes together and embracing those things. So like another way to do this building would have been to try to hide or conceal or drift the joints around. Drifting the joints meaning like they're not expressed where they're truly connecting. They're like, the slab edge is really expressed a foot above or something like that. So we were like, let's just take the grid for what the grid is, express the edges. It's going to be a caulk joint around there, and the panels are going to go together. And we're all about just seeing the panels and how they come together. And I think getting the client on board with that, and again, you get a bit of a rougher looking facade compared to like a glass building, but
Right.
all the kind of pieces of the facade are expressed, and we want to do that. So just listening to their method of installation and then putting that into the actual early design of the project, I think that's what was saving us stuff. So we weren't, again, the thing that I've just seen so many times is you design a project and you get to the contractor and like, well, we wouldn't build it that way at all. And for the scale of the building, like we're talking about on this project, like that can be a huge decision. Like you thought every 5 feet you should have a panel. Well, this one's every 15 feet. So like we can do, 15 vertically and then 30 feet horizontally. So those are huge chunks. So I think by designing the pattern of the project to embrace the method of installation, was a real big deal, and we were like pushing for that. And again, I think that it's not really novel. Well, maybe it is to some folks to listen to the builder, but try and have that as a means of, we should try and do this because I think it can. It wasn't so much about saving time; it just seemed to like be the natural way to do the project. And we're still getting all of our expression and other kind of agenda put together on the project creatively, but there's some things we can do to just like make the project easier for people to build. So I wouldn't say that's like innovative, but I think it's important to.
I don't know
listen.
about that. I mean, and we are hearing more and more about early collaboration on projects.
Yeah.
So maybe it's not brand new, but I can still point to projects I see and hear about constantly
Yeah.
that nobody even had the thought to talk to a subcontractor while
Yeah.
they were designing the building. And
Yeah.
that once again, that whole concept of getting out of your box. This building's not going to go up because of just the architect. We all know that.
Yeah.
You have
Yeah.
a whole project team getting out of your box and doing some of that. The thing I hate to hear most, I tell my class, and my class starts tonight, so they're going to get the list of things you can't say in my class. I have like 10 of them. If you say it, I'm just going to kick you out.
Yeah.
Jokingly, of course.
Yeah.
But one of them is that I've heard my entire career, which is lengthy these days,
Yeah.
is I don't have time.
Yeah.
You should, I'll talk to somebody and say, you should look into this, or you should call this person, or
Yeah.
we need to define these things because I don't have time.
Yeah.
You don't have 10 times the amount of time during construction to figure it out,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
10 times the amount of time during construction to work out these things because you weren't open-minded enough to talk to the person that actually has to build it ahead
Well,
of
yeah.
time.
Yeah, and having gone through these projects, we know the design timelines. We know it's going to be fast. We know the milestones of SD, DD, CD, and then our construction phase. But I'm looking at the project, and the facade's becoming a real big deal. So we're trying to like pull up our ability to throw out ideas and have a discussion, at least a discussion. You're talking about like a couple pages, 11 by 17, some images you made and over the course of like 4 hours, and throw an idea at them to try and have a discussion. So I think that's the way we think about our early design packages: is how much of a discussion can they warrant, because that's going to be the rich part. Us kind of showing pretty pictures, it's helpful obviously, but at the same time, like, we're trying to figure out a building. We're not trying to like just put images out, right? So like,
Right.
what type of content can you put in front of somebody to have them engage in it and help you kind of have that discussion or expand what the project can be. So, and again, I think especially being a younger practice, and as you go through these things, I think you just need to be it's fine to ask and draw some strange kind of solutions of how a building should go together, and then have somebody tell you, oh, that's no way, you would never do it that way, but you would do this thing. And in that mixture of like the kind of naive component of drawing details and the like very technical side, I think you start to find things. I think that's also how you get kind of progress, I think, made within specifically like this project, like facade design. That's how you kind of generate something new out of it. So,
Well, how different would this building have been had you just stuck with your original gut reaction that 15 by 15 is kind of big? Kind of big.
yeah.
How much would that have affected the final design of the building and the whole installation process had you not went ahead and had that conversation anyway and found out, oh, we can do way bigger?
Well, I think we might have lost the concrete facade, to be honest. Like, it might have been, if it wasn't optimized, they would price it and they'd be like, we're not doing this. We're just going to do the time on the clock to design kind of runs out, and then people just start to go to what they already know. So that period that you're inventing something new kind of goes away. So that's like the death of value engineering a little bit. I'm a proponent of doing good value engineering as well, so I don't want to be off on that. But I think if you kind of misunderstand or miss kind of optimize the skin, get to that point, and they're just like, well, we'll just put glass everywhere. We'll be fine with this. And yes, you technically can do that, but all the expression and like that kind of moment of creating something new is kind of starts to evaporate a little bit. So, in my mind, there's like a clock running of like, how can we like cover ground and get kind of confirmation on what we're making before the door closes on the budget of the project or the energy of the client group to listen to you for another 2 weeks or whatever. So. Yeah.
Well, it's a huge lesson, and I hope we still have a number of questions, but I'm hoping a lot of people listen to this episode. I really am.
Nice.
So, as I told you before we started, we're all about the challenges and the lessons learned, because that's what we learn from. That's what we grow as professionals from. We don't grow from the things that are easy.
Yeah.
And so I think some of the best lessons are going to come from taking your design vision and turning it into something that can actually be built. Because I can imagine, I'm not an architect. I could draw you all kinds of interesting things that nobody could ever build, but hey, it looks cool.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about one design challenge that in particular on this building that required, extra research or problem solving to get to where you wanted to go, and how did you solve it?
Yeah, so I think solving it was pretty straightforward, but recognizing the issue probably didn't happen till down the road. So like the project between that lower part where the columns are kind of dancing around and the kind of rigorous grid, there's some soffits that kind of cut into the building, and they kind of draw you into the lobby. So if you're looking at photos, there's the double height moment where the lobby entry is, and this kind of colonnade that's capped by this wood soffit that moves around there. So, we creating images of the project, it's dealing with surfaces and modeling things. We texture mapped all that. Like we wanted it to be something really warm and kind of have that wood feel. That was a big thing, is to see wood or like a warmer material when you're walking by as a pedestrian, that you probably wouldn't really notice when you're driving by in a car. So that's kind of one thing that adds to the kind of warmer feel of that lower environment. But figuring out that wood soffit, which is sometimes a soffit, sometimes a wall, and then it turns, and then it also turns around a corner. How do you panelize the wood planks that go around there? And I remember looking back at our renderings, and like the texture map was all wacky and didn't make sense because you're just kind of throwing things in there like, yeah, this should all be wood, but you don't realize that how does wood turn a corner? What happens with the angle? How does it turn a corner vertically and horizontally? And how do you get the continuity of a pattern system going up and around all these edges? I think solving it in the field was just trying to make a decision about how do you kind of angle the wood in a way that it can deal with all these conditions. And it's something that I think you can draw through detail. You can draw, and that was in the set. There was like, what's the edge of the wood soffit? What's a corner look like? But it changed so much, and the building shapes are changing. So I think it was one of those moments where you can draw the overall ceiling plan and you can reflect the ceiling plan, and you can draw all the details, but it's a three-dimensional kind of problem of how that plane changes with material depth and the right offset you want from the concrete panel and all that sort of stuff. So that was a moment of like, okay, if you're doing a complex 3D surface, like generally, right, like it's changing wall, ceiling, all that stuff, I think there should be a little more attention to like how is that all coming together beforehand. And solving it was really easy. We just had to kind of pick a direction of how to cut the wood and do a couple more sketches about directing where that goes. But I think we didn't even know it was really a big thing until they were getting out there, and they're like, hey, I'm going to hang all these like individual sticks we're going to put on the building, and there's a bunch of questions about how they come together, and those are not addressed. So how do you want to do this to make it work? So I remember going to Austin and like looking at the soffit conditions and thinking through it, and kind of reworked it, and ended up getting the look we wanted. And it's super clean. We had, again, great subs, and that was the Akoya Delta Millworks product that was there. The other benefit is I think people spec Delta Millworks kind of all over the country, and we have on other projects, and we were like specking it on here. And I remember the sub being, oh yeah, we'll go talk to Delta. I'm like, well, what do you mean? Like you're going to call them on the phone? They're like, no, the Delta shop is 2 blocks away from this building. So we can just go have them come out and talk about how their product's going to come together. I'll just give them a call. And I was like, that's amazing. I've always wondered where because people have spec'd that it's a really nice wood product. They have the kind of lots of different of the charred kind of woodwork and other things like that. So anyways, so it was interesting to see. The solution was pretty straightforward, but recognizing the problem I think is hard. So I think those are ones that I really focus on, because when you're getting into a project and designing it early on, I think you're a better designer if you know kind of the outcomes of some of the moves you're making, or if you've lived that, or at least recognize some of those outcomes before. Facade panelization, soffit continuity, all that kind of stuff. There are things that when you do an early massing model, you can kind of think through those a little bit to not put yourself in a position later. And again, you can't foresee everything, so there's a system there to kind of correct and figure that out. But now I think about, if we're doing these planes that are dodging in and out and doing all this stuff, there's a material thickness and a grain and a direction and an angle to all that stuff. It's very, very specific. It's not just a poly surface moving through a Rhino model or whatever. So yeah, that'd be my advice to a future self or maybe I already used that advice. Watch the model a little bit.
So one of the things I just noticed while you were talking to me about the wood, going down a rabbit hole, by the way, just a quick one, is the way that you hung the light fixtures inside. So I'm assuming that was intentional to somewhat mimic the columns outside, or is that just my perception of it?
I mean, I like that read of it for sure. I think it's pretty much it's intentional in that when we were doing a lot of the interior work and that pedestrian experience, it was like, how do we really, like the kind of odd angles and put things off a little bit more, because that lobby experience when you walk in, it's kind of like a big kind of concrete shell with some soffits in it. but just like you're hanging a light, that was our opportunity. So how can we do something kind of different with that or interesting with that? And I think we were doing that interior design when there was a local lighting artist called Warbach. They had done this. If you look on the outside of the building, there's these steel. They look like I-beams that have lights in them. I don't think we have any nighttime photos of them, but those are actually custom designed, really, really tall light fixtures that Warbach designs, manufactures, and installs, and does all the own wiring and everything themselves. That's like it's a very like handmade light that's probably like, I don't know, 30 feet tall. And
Wow.
and what they did is they saw our columns and they just did like another column of light basically that matched it. So it really fit in with the building. It was all out of steel. Super cool. So at night, those pieces glow towards the lobby entrances. So those moves were going on, and then we were in the interior space just trying to figure out how do we hang a really straightforward linear light. And it was kind of again, how do you kind of take some of these very off the shelf things or very normal things and kind of make them a little different, especially in an environment like this, to try to draw some attention to it or kind of offset the kind of nature of a big chunky building on the outside, right? So,
Well, that was the first thing that popped out to me as I saw those, and I'm like, it's the tiny details sometimes,
yeah,
that people you could have just hung them straight across,
yeah,
and that would have been fine. It would have looked fine.
yeah. Well, like
But that
even in that zone
added
as
something.
well. Yeah, that was fun. And then really good metal sub on the project that, we had to do these doors from the lobby into the tenant lounge, and always wanted to do like a really big pivot door. And again, we were like kind of throwing that idea out there. I say, we're already using a lot of steel work on this project. Can the steel sub make a door? And Gensler, the AOR, had to help us figure out permitting wise and how we get our fire separation and things like that, and our operations of the door. But that was all pretty well figured out. And then I think the metal sub's called Sarabi. I think they did the door and they custom built all of it, and then they all kind of just pivot and open up. So it creates this really interesting relationship between the lobby and the tenant lounge. And again, you talk about details and the impact of those on your kind of experience of a building. It's just a really interesting way to like have a really large pivot door that just kind of falls open. And that's more, it doesn't make one zone sort of totally sealed from the other. It kind of breeds this kind of idea of connection between the two that's a little different than opening a door. And so there's very small moments in the project that we have that, but like just those little things, like how do you open a door? How do you kind of do a different door in a commercial setting? I think can really change, like when you walk into that space, okay, this is a little different than what I've seen before, right? It's not like a heavy glass, door with canted cardboard or something on it. It's a whole different experience. So again, very lucky to be able to pitch those ideas and people be like, yeah, we could do that. I was like, oh, really? You could do that? so yeah.
The moments architects dream of.
Yeah.
Here, what do you think of this? Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the interior of the building. What are, just touch briefly on a few of the more unique things that we haven't already talked about going on in the interior of this building.
Well, from a scope perspective, it was a really great opportunity that we were design architects for the core shell. So we designed the skin of the building outside and like kind of went through all that. And then we also got the scope to do all the interior architecture and the furniture as well in the project. And then we worked with a local art curator as well to kind of help pick art for the project. So especially in a commercial setting, it was great to like we were a through line, but again, we had partners piling onto this whole thing throughout the whole process. But that through line of like trying to bring kind of early concepts from the outside into the interior, and how do those concepts become something of an interior environment concept? So for us, the facade and the outside of the building had so much texture, and there was so much specificity put into like how do we get a warmer toned concrete and all this stuff, and how do we do the wood? So it was like we want the interior to kind of take on the agenda that the exterior had, but do it in an interior way. So we want texture, we want materials to be expressed as like relatively kind of unfinished as they can be. So black and steel, it's the finishing, but it's not painted. It's like you see the steel and the change in the color of the steel. We wanted the Akoya wood from the outside to kind of come on the inside. It became casework. And then the other choices were like to add, like, what are other like interior materials that can take on that same agenda, right? Like leathers, um, uh, other kind of like really kind of very natural fabrics that are in some of the cushions and the rugs and things like that. So all of those things were like around the same ideas. And so putting the interior package together was pretty much like we kind of, again, wrapped it all together. It was built off the ethos and the story of the project that the entire project team already kind of knew. So I think the decisions in the interior for the client side seemed to be pretty easy. There was like functional things we were solving, but like that part of the project, I feel like there was a lot of things there, but at the same time, it kind of came together really, really fast. Um, and yeah, so there's a tenant lounge, a bike hub, two lobbies. And so all those spaces also needed to feel different. So as you experience the project, it does feel like you're going in different places, but at the same time, they're kind of built on the same agenda. So we, again, texture and having materials really kind of just be themselves. And then trying to, especially when you walk in the building, try to express that you're in a type 1 concrete building, right? You can see some of the concrete ceilings, you see the floors. Try and just let that be its thing and not cover it all up. Which sounds pretty straightforward, but it is. There's acoustical issues. There's all kinds of things to kind of deal with when you do that. A lot of the ceilings you see in the project are like an acoustic backed perf, so it has like some properties, but you don't really notice it. I think the only thing that was really difficult was the exit signs, which I think every architect that's photographed an interior space has had fun with exit signs. So, but we worked through that as well. So, but yeah.
I think I'm pretty sure the picture I'm looking at right now is the employee or the lounge area that
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned. There's like
Yeah.
a bar
Yeah.
and some stools. What I'm just curious, what there's a dark tiled ceiling over like where the couch and chairs are, um, and over the bar. What is that tile?
It's a perforated metal, but there's an acoustic backer inside of it. So um, it's like a perf ceiling, basically. It's a product I think Armstrong makes. Might be off on that. Um, there wasn't the one that's in the photo might not be what's finally in there. There was some they installed one ceiling and then it wasn't the right one and they put a different one in anyway. So there was like a round and round on that ceiling a little bit, but we've used it a couple other times. Kind of has like an industrial feel to it, but it's performing and as a regular lay-in ceiling basically. So um, yeah, it's a good one to kind of work in these open ceiling concepts.
I love it, and I love the dark color. Of course, my ceiling in my vaulted ceilings downstairs is the same color.
Oh, nice,
I have really dark
nice.
ceilings, yeah. But no, I love the mixture of materials you have in the interior with the concrete and the metal tiles and the wood, and it just it's kind of like my favorite kind of
Nice.
interior decorating kind of scheme anyway. But it really just plays well together, and that variety really gives it a pop and a feel that I don't think you could get any other way. You don't get a lot of stuff like this in office buildings. So
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
really,
It's
especially when you get inside. Sometimes they'll make it look really cool on the outside, and then you get
yeah,
inside and it's
yeah,
so cookie cutter.
yeah.
Um,
But again, it was the whole team really wanting to do something different. So and they recognized that early on, and we were all trying to figure out what that can be. I think the aesthetic challenge in all of that is if you do a big concrete building and you do a lot of exposed concrete inside and you do a bunch of black and steel, like, is it going to feel really cold and is it going to feel like a jail? That's like kind of always the side of it. So there was a bunch of little moves about, embrace the concrete, but how can you, again, it's like a really general term, but like, how do you warm it up, quote unquote? So like on the outside of the building, we have Redondo, who was the concrete sub. They had 4 or 5 different concrete mixes that we tested out of the box. And then they had different aggregate mixes, and they had, you can do one of these 5, and we're like, can we do a little bit of 1 and a little bit of 4? So that was getting kind of black aggregate in a lighter, warmer gray mix, and that combo gives you a warmer concrete tone on the exterior. And it was intended to be really rough, so it's not smooth. It's got like a lot of like chunk to it. for a concrete facade. And then the mullions then became, these kind of bronzed mullions, which again, the bronze color next to the concrete pulls that out a little bit, pulls the warmer tone. And the glazing was a low iron glazing, so it didn't have any green or blue in it. It was pretty much a kind of darker, clear content glazing. And that, again, not putting a blue glazing or green glazing in the building kind of helped keep the concrete color stable. And then you just continue to make those decisions as you go through the project. Can you bring in leathers and woods to kind of help add some warmth to it? These are all kind of general, like, aesthetic ways to warm up the project. But again, we were talking about all that with the client, so that we all knew what we were trying to get to. Like, how do we make sure it doesn't feel too cold at the end of the day? And then I just got to give, like, the biggest shout out to TBG, the landscape architect. And their work that just played off of all this and, like, ramped it all up so much. When you see some of the views up above and you look across the courtyard, like, all the, like, ground level action, that all these kind of crazy angles and colors and the furniture they brought in and the colors that they picked in their concrete played off the building. So it's just a continuity of the design decisions was important. So
I as cool as most of these materials are, it is a very warm building, and that's not an easy thing to pull off.
Yeah.
Not an easy thing at all, but it looks fantastic.
Awesome.
So one of the things I read was that you designed the large interior spaces for adaptability to the needs of tenants, which obviously over time are going to change.
Yeah.
What kinds of specific things did you do to make those big spaces flexible?
Yeah. The biggest thing on a core shell project like this is to really look at future flexibility. So first thing is, getting good core locations. So there's two buildings, right? One's much larger than the other because of the angle of the street. So one building's like, floor plates are like 35,000, a little bit above, and other one's like 25,000, but in that amount of space, like, the larger building has two cores that are split as far apart as we can. That allows for a ton of future planning. We also, when we did the restrooms across the building, they're all more than code required restroom sizing, so you can have a higher occupancy. I think the biggest thing that was really exciting in the project was some of the superstructure and column spacing. So sort of from north to south, it's a 30-foot structural grid. But when you go the other way from the kind of lengthwise of the building, from the core out to the skin, there's only one column there. So you get a 47 foot, I think, base spacing in one direction and 30 foot in the other. So that allows you, like, when you get into the building and you look down, you basically just see a big open shell, which, again, it seems pretty straightforward, but really focusing on, like, good column spacing and optimizing that can open up the project really well. So, like, each building is about 120 feet wide, 125 feet. Yeah. And it has just, like, again, those column bays in the center, and then the outside columns, and that's pretty much it. So that was how we were really optimizing the core shell, was sculpt the building in a way that makes sense to really do kind of whatever you want. And again, we were trying, and it was a much taller floor to floor as well. So the 14 foot 11 or 10, that makes these really big volumes of space. So when you're walking through that empty shell, it just feels like this. You feel like you don't see any columns. There's some there, but you just see down the glass line and the kind of shell of the building. And it kind of, I think people can pretty much do whatever they want in there from a code perspective. So yeah, and there was that. There was also, if you look at the plans of the project, we planned a bunch of outdoor balconies on each level of the project, but they're kind of just, it's like from the exterior of the project, there's the gridded facade, and then, like, a panel will have the glass removed, and you'll see a little balcony rail, and those are the little balconies inserted in the project. So those were strategically planned, so that way, if you did a multi-tenant on each floor, or you cut the floor plates in half with two tenants or whatever, everybody sort of gets a balcony. So, and that kind of led to some of our sustainability and well building measures down the road, of giving fresh air access or access to an outdoor space as much as we can. Again, it's we don't know where the tenant demising is going to go, but we try to provide these balconies that kind of imply a certain way to demise the floors based off of how you would kind of equally use balconies throughout the project. There's also roof decks on the project, but I'm talking about more of the little balcony moments in it.
We're getting way better about talking about early collaboration, and we typically do studies about the user groups of whatever the type of building is. But you're the second guest I've had recently. The other one was on a hospital project that's really kind of talked at a deeper level about who's going to be in this building, not just who's going to be using it, but who's going to be working in it.
Yeah, yeah.
And what do they need? And for this hospital project, again, COVID was a game changer in the way they looked at some things as opposed to hospitals they'd done before, because of, we all know what our health professionals went through during COVID, and really changed the design of this one to things like taking care of the people that work there.
Yeah.
Not just looked at a lot of things for patients as well, but I don't think that there's always necessarily a huge focus. There'll be a focus on the users, the visitors, but the actual people that have to work in that building day after day and what they might need. And something as simple as, is there somewhere for the security guard to sit?
Well, I thought it was like, someone's like, we get a point for a chair for the security guard to sit. I'm like, that's great. Like, they need a chair. Like, they just got a line item for an amazing chair for them, which is like, why is this seems like so, like that would be thought of, but I think sometimes it's not. So I don't know. We do a lot of adaptive reuse projects as well. And when I start those projects, I want to talk to the client and I want to talk to the building engineer who's been working on the building for the last 10 years or whatever. And I want to hear all of their, I use this door and I turn this corner and it's really weird. And then like this light never works. And then the ceiling's low here, or like the HVAC in this room never really gets to this corner. And it's just so interesting to see people that have, and talk with people that have like really lived the life of the building from like, almost like from the building's perspective in a weird way. Like they're like advocates for how this building should breathe and how it should function, and how it can be used better. We did a project that was like a 50-year-old building, and the project engineer had been on the project since it was built. His whole career was in the building.
Wow.
So it was a really fascinating thing to be like, oh yeah, and like, in 82 we added this thing and it never really worked, but here's what we fixed it in 95 or whatever. And you're like, how do you, and then the fact that they remembered all that stuff, and yeah, that person, like, and they were excited about the design work we were doing. And it was just like another, like, tell me how this should be working and what's not working in this existing envelope that's here. What are the things we got to fix, we got to get right this time. So I think when you do a ground up building, it's a little harder to kind of have someone advocating for the user or the kind of management engineering group that would be operating the project. But in some cases, in some large projects, it's especially like a hospital, like, that there's just so many people. There's a whole collection of voices there that have something to say that would really, again, I think most architects want that feedback as early as they can to kind of know, I want to design for that condition. The more knowledge we have of the end user, the better off I think we're able to make the project specific and interesting and function well and do all those things. So, yeah.
I couldn't agree more. Facilities people, I mean, they rate right up there at the top of the list of, not just what works and what doesn't, but also seeing how their users of that building use the building, as opposed to how you might think they're going to use the buildings, or what takes. The story I hear everywhere is women's restrooms take the biggest beating. I just over and over again, I hear that story, but having, depending on the type of building, obviously having that input of this thing breaks every 5 minutes, and designing something different so that they don't have that situation anymore. It's golden for the owner.
Yeah.
And it's really, just useful on a day-to-day basis.
It's just like fuel for the designer's mind, I think, as well. Like even on like the first project we did, this like little eyewear store called Garrett Light in LA that we did like, Jai and I did that when we had other jobs and we did that at night, a long time ago. But I remember I would go back to the store like every other month and like look at how it's just like it's like a 1 room, 1,000 square foot showroom. I would just kind of walk through and it's like, how are people walking around and looking at and using the space? Because we did kind of a different way of organizing the wall and things like that. And I was like, is it really working? And I would go talk to Jay. I'm like, I don't think people use this. I think I think that concept didn't work, or like we did this cool light picture feature, but nobody ever looks at it, like why did we do that? So there's always this like, you learn so much when you build a project, even a small project. And I think taking the time to really watch it live, like what happens, like, cause that project's now probably 10 years old. And when I go to LA, I'll stop by there every once in a while, but it's just interesting to see like, how do these things kind of change over time? And I had another thing, like people want us to build these timeless projects. I think Eastbound is kind of in that category of like, we want a timeless building. I think that's for sure, but I think it's more interesting to see like how time affects a project functionally, aesthetically, all that kind of stuff. So, it's robust enough to kind of get through the changes of users and kind of can adjust to that. So I don't know, there's just a lot to learn when you put a big project up or a small project up. Just seeing how people interact with it. I think that's, for me, that's been a big deal and thing that's allowed us because now we're like in the seat of having a practice and having projects, and we want our clients to be happy. We want the buildings and the residents of the building to be like enjoying it. So the only way you're going to know that is to go and see it happening. You can only model 3D people in a project so far, right? So you need to see how it all comes together. So.
Well, I don't know, with technology, you can
I know,
soon probably going to be able to put these little fake people in your model and have them do things. But another great piece of advice, you don't know if what you've designed is really working the way you envisioned it with the user group if you don't go look. And even if you can't change it later, it can inform what you do the next time. And you can grow from that if it's something that doesn't work, or maybe it's something that you tried once and it turns out it's fantastic and something you should consider doing more often. But you don't know that if you don't go spend a little time in that building, not just the walkthrough after it's built, but
no, you got to like really sit there by yourself. I like this. I do like go by myself when the building, like nobody knows I'm coming. The security guard doesn't know I'm supposed to be there. So the doors aren't like sitting open. I've got to go and walk up and see who's going to is someone going to greet new people as they come in? Is it easy to get access to things? Like kind of walk over here. I just remember some of these tours in East Austin because we were going back for some other work. I would just like stop. I would like take an Uber around town and I would stop there and I just get out and just like walk around for 15 minutes. Just try to look at the light, like look under the lights, the bollard lights, and look at the ceiling and, oh, there's a wasp nest there. Why is there a wasp nest there? And then like, there's a step here. Why is the step falling apart? And I would like kind of take my notes and I'd just drive away. And I was like, it was just like a little spot check for my own knowledge. And I think every time I go back, I try to go see this project because it was one of the biggest ones we've done yet. But I mean, there's big ideas you have in a project, but just like simple things of like, someone put a mat in front of the door, like a rug, and it always folds like that. You shouldn't do that. You should embed the rug into the floor and get it so it's not a trip hazard. Like you find all these strange things, but you got to kind of it's sort of like the banal moments of a project, and you're studying those. So it takes a little bit of an attention to the detail and time to kind of see that stuff happen.
Well, one thing we could do I'm always looking for ways to change or improve where it needs to. Wouldn't it be nice if a 1-year post-occupancy evaluation was just a standard part of every architectural contract? Where you go kind of dig deep and check all the things. I know a lot of people do that, but a lot don't. Some never pass the grand opening, never step foot in that building again. So construction. Mm-hmm. This is where the rubber meets the road. You've got this great design and now we're going out to build it and, okay, wait, that's not going to quite come together the way we thought. There's always challenges during construction. There is never in my career ever have I seen a perfect project. Can you just tell me about one thing you learned during construction of this building or one challenge you encountered during construction that you solved, that just one thing that stands out for you during construction that will be kind of change how you think about whatever that thing
Yeah.
is going forward.
I think on this project, when we have like a high contrast between like a wood soffit and a concrete facade, like those are two very different, expression of them is very different, and how they come together is very different. Um, Kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but that's kind of that was the biggest thing that I think was on our end that was kind of challenging to realize in the field was the wood soffits, and we're asking them to do too much, and how do they relate to the concrete panel and all that stuff. So um, it's funny, as standard as details can be in a project, like there was like the concrete panels themselves, there's attachment details and how the edges are finished out, but like when those panels make a sharp corner, when they like make a more kind of obtuse corner, when they have a soffit coming into them, when they kind of butt up against the garage, when there's you know when they hit the ground, like all these kind of other conditions, like we could plan out what the panel's going to do for sure. The facade, we know our plan there. It's all the other things that interact with those details that you don't quite know. Like, do the panel close to the ground? Where's the dirt surface actually end up, and how much planting is going to come in there? And is that whole lower level going to get blasted with water? Or in this case, we did a whole bunch of graffiti coating on the lower part of the building. So like, how is that going to come into play? So there was a bunch of things, like you draw the project in isolation relatively as a building, right? But like its interaction with the immediate kind of land of the panel. We don't want anybody to spray paint it, so we got to get graffiti coating on it like tomorrow. Can you guys pick a coating? I'm like, so we've spent a year figuring out concrete. Now you're going to paint something on it, and you're like, oh my gosh, and it turns out to be great. They know everybody's fine. But there's a lot of those moments of like seeing where your super put together design and detail is, but when it actually arrives on site and has different conditions to it, like how's that going to change it? And I think that's why we do the meetings, to check in progress of things. Like when they were hanging panels, we would see the first ones to see what's going on. That's when the kind of the anti-graffiti coating came on. We were like watching some of the joinery between the panels, like were they as consistent as we thought they were, and how much of the caulking joint would you really see? Because we can draw it and see all that, but when you see light on it and the color of that, like what's going on. So there's a ton of things. Like I just can't stress probably like underestimating how much the project can change, and just being open to that. Like, okay, well, that's not what we thought it was. So what's our intent and where are we going with it? So that's kind of my ability and thoughts about rebounding when you're going through a construction admin process or construction phase service stuff. So trying to be nimble, but remember the intent, I think, is important. Yeah, that was kind of the majority of. Again, there were some other big ones that probably weren't in our wheelhouse, about underwater or underground tanks and detention tanks and fire lane access that the landscape architect was working with, and some other things. But I think that's kind of the thing, is we had a repeated facade system. You think it's just going to kind of go up, it's going to happen real quick, but there's a bunch of little decisions that come into that as it interacts with the environment in that specific location when it's super hot in Austin. Like, like how do you play that off? So yeah.
So we like to close out every episode with at least one broader industry question before our final question.
Yeah.
And so the one I'm going to ask you today, because you're a teacher and I'm a teacher outside of our day job.
Yeah.
And so I imagine I know we're kindred spirits a little bit just by listening to you and chatting with you today.
Mm-hmm.
So the days of drawing details for years and years in an architectural firm before you're allowed to do anything of any importance or any construction administration or leadership, those days are pretty much over. I mean, they're still out there a little bit, there's still a number of firms still operating kind of in the old school way, but within the next few years, they're going to be gone completely.
Yeah.
There is value in some of that, obviously.
Yeah.
But we're in a different world now. So can you tell me what you think our architecture firms could be doing better to help our younger professionals get up to speed faster in real world architecture when
Yeah.
they don't have the benefit of drawing stair details for 10 years before they start taking on other pieces of business. I see young
Yeah.
professionals fresh out of school doing CA and things that nobody would have let you do before.
Yeah.
What could we as firms be doing better? What's your personal advice or your personal opinion there?
Well, I think there's so much to practice to learn, and it's a practice, right? So you're constantly learning. So I think you really can't expect someone to know every detail in the world before they build something, because you're always learning new details, but you're always going to keep building stuff. So it's more, that's why the definition of practice, I think, is incredibly important to focus on when you're looking at mentoring or bringing people into the practice, right? They're going to have a life of learning. They're not going to get to a point to be good enough to go do something else. They need to constantly be kind of growing. It's incredibly important. I think for me, what was beneficial in my career was when I really got to see the design work being presented to a client, or the design was pretty good, talking with my bosses about it, and like, well, you need to present to the client and talk through this. And I'm like, oh, so now I got to present. Okay, it's got to be better now. So I think there's this level of ownership that I think is very possible to have early on in your career over the work that you're doing, in whatever way that might be. So is it designing something and then you're presenting it to the client, or is it just sitting in client groups and hearing them just go off the rails on what they want or don't want, praise or not praise on a project? Or is it being with a contractor and just like walking a project and seeing their perception of, damn, architects built this room and it doesn't work, like I think it's really, really hard for young professionals to be just stuck at their desk in one space, especially like a work from home situation. Like I think we have a hybrid strategy here, and I'm all for it to some degree, but also I think it's really hard to like just get out there and kind of be involved in the things you design and how they're being um, uh, absorbed by or interacting with the world. I think that's incredibly important. So you can say you need more CA experience, you can say you need more presentation experience, whatever it is, as long as you're seeing how your work and what you've drawn is being, read by others, I think and listening to that and then using that as kind of a way to grow, I think is really, really important. And I think that can happen year one out of school. I think that needs to be happening, year 50 or whatever out of school. Like it's a lifelong practice of that, but you need to learn to, like, I have vision, that's great, I'm putting ideas out there, but I'm also looking at how that's being interpreted, and then curating my own process to make sure that's kind of part of that. I think that's how buildings get better. I think that's how teams get better. I think that's how you can kind of mentor your career. And again, you don't need to be like out there talking and waving your arms around and speaking so much, but just listening in conversations. So we try to have our team is always in design presentations. They go to the job sites. They've got to see what happens when we do this move. What happens when we don't figure out parking in the building. It's like the one thing that we never want to work on, but we've got to figure out parking. And you see a client like light up about where's the parking, and then everyone's like, oh gosh, yeah, we need to figure that out. But I can tell people the requirements, but I want them to see. And also we want our team to like be listening and seeing how those conversations evolve without, Jai and I involved. Like, where is this thing going? Where does it want to go? And I think that's where you need to let the project and the creative process on the project have its own life a little bit more, but having more people listening and curating that impact of the work a bit. So I'm all for people just, unfiltered. Basically, you're going to listen to the client. We're going to sit here. If you want to present, you should. If not, that's cool. And also, you're drawing this window in this location. Like, let's talk about why you did that and why you want to do that, and we'll help you kind of guide you through that. But at the same time, you kind of just need to go through what's it mean to do a 2-bedroom apartment with windows that aren't big enough. Like, what's that feel like? Why? What's going to happen from that? So I think it's interaction of your work and seeing it in the world is really, really important.
Well, that's great advice. I know that I've had the benefit of working in multiple disciplines in my career. I've worked in construction, in architecture, MEP engineering, now building science.
Nice.
And if I had to pick, if anybody were to ask me, what is the single most valuable thing, if you had to pick one that you've done in your career, and I agree with you, by the way, it's a lifelong, if you think you know it all, get out of this business, please.
Yeah.
But the single most valuable thing I did was got outside of that box, that proverbial box.
Yeah.
And I have a lens that most people I know don't have, because they haven't had that level of, I've actually worked in these firms, not just even visited, but the same concept applies with our young professionals. Today we're talking about architecture and getting out on the job site. Go call this manufacturer's rep and figure this out. Go do these pieces. Don't just tell them what to do.
Yeah.
Even if they're not leading the show in every particular situation, just hearing the kinds of conversations people have makes you go, oh, I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
Or I didn't know about that. Or, oh, I've got to go back and look at this. Invaluable to get that exposure. And you can do it day out of school. Yeah. Start getting that exposure.
I think it's really good to get the exposure, but also still bring your ideas and your intent with it. Like, propose the crazy, weird idea, and then, be open to see how that can change. So I think it's this, like, the other end is you're like always in the field and you just do what you've seen a million times. I think that's okay, but I like the mixture of like proposing something a little wild and trying to figure out how to make it happen, and then teetering back and forth. So like specifically for the architects, I think that's the traits that you can have, creating and curating, like kind of back and forth, I think are good things to toggle off and on. I think it's also really great when people just get on jobs for the first time and they're like, why is the building 11 foot tall, floor to floor? What does that mean? Why do you do that? And you're like, why did we do it? Like having some level of like entry level person coming and asking questions, I think has been great for us, strengthening our work and strengthening like things we've done a million times, like, bay spacing or parking or whatever. Having someone say, well, why do you do it this way? I think those are great questions for young professionals to be asking. They learn, and then we also question ourselves a little bit. So the whole mixture is great, I think.
There's also a message, an underlying message there to our firm leadership and those of us that have been around a little bit longer it is their job to create those opportunities. It is their job to empower I mean, most of the people that take my class, I teach this class 6 months out of my year, are younger professionals. And I hear over and over again, I don't want to ask that question. They'll ask me a question and I'll say, well, you need to ask your boss this in your firm before I can answer you. Yeah. I don't want to ask, and I don't want to look stupid or, no. And I think the ones that ask, the ones that ask the questions are the ones you want to keep going, but they learn 20 times faster to have all that exposure and to have that environment of, you can come ask me anything and I'm never going to treat you like it's a stupid question. Yeah. And so, there are some of our senior people that are doing a great job of that and other ones, out in the industry that aren't. Yeah. But they will get up to speed even faster like you need them to, like you're going to have them do, because Gen X is so tiny. Yeah. So all these younger people are being asked to step up 15 years sooner.
Well, we're still a practice that's like asking, like, how do you do a precast facade? I don't know. So like we started there on this project and got our way through building it. But again, we had great partners in the project. We got a great architect of record, Gensler, helped a lot. We had great build partners, but we were there asking the question. So we're doing that. And again, our clients trusting us to kind of endeavor to do the project best kind of scenario we can. So I think there was opportunity given and questions asked, and you create something out of that. And again, you're still rigorous in studying it and doing all that, but I think that's how new things kind of come about a little bit. So
couldn't agree more. Okay, final question. Yeah. Everybody gets this one. As human beings, we all hope that our presence and actions in this life will result in some kind of impact on our world or on the people around us, big or small. for me personally, I call that my world domination statement. Hashtag total world domination. So personal or professional, how do you as an individual hope to make an impact on this world? What's your world domination statement?
When it said world domination, I was like, how am I taking over the world? That's what I take that as,
I know.
but I don't think that's the total thing. But about creating impact, I think, especially with West of West, it's been about us. We have a lot of different types of projects now, and working at a lot of different locations. We've learned a lot, and we've grown kind of this creative umbrella, which has been good. And I think we're really excited about how we can share that and kind of imbue that onto the people that, or the residents of our projects, or the team that's working on those projects. So, and there's a bit of an educational stance in my head as well about how are you sharing knowledge. So I think impact kind of comes in the form for me of how you can kind of share and coach kind of others a little bit. Again, teaching design studios, it's really great to see what students come up with, and I never want to like tell them to design a project one way or another, because that just completely defeats the purpose. But finding this way of coaching, I think for me has been a big deal. And then in our practice as well, we want our team making projects and not like Jirai just drawing a drawing and then somebody else makes it bigger. Yeah, like that's
Right.
makes no sense. So how do you go about kind of creatively coaching folks? So I think that's one of the things for me that I think is my approach to these things in terms of impact. And what we leave behind, maybe I think I'm excited by doing. The reason why I'm in architecture is we're building big pieces of a city or a corner store or an interior environment, but they're creating an experience for people to kind of interact with, specifically non-architects that don't get it. It's about those kind of everyday moments that people walk through, and like, have you made that somehow better or thought-provoking or elevated to some degree? So I think for me, it's like, how do you kind of find very simple things out there in the world and make them a little different or a little more kind of positive from an experience standpoint? And I guess that's a pursuit in what we do in our work. But I think that's kind of the lasting impact. And I do see it as an evolution of work, and that's how West to West is run. We started doing little retail stores, and now we're doing this project's like a 450,000 square foot 2-block project that's under construction now. So like, it's kind of crazy to see how our creative ambitions have grown to have such larger impact. But we're really trying to see what those can do. So I don't know. I guess the world domination part is what freaks me out. It's like, I don't want to take over the world. I just want to have people that kind of have a good relationship with the built environment, and give people space to make great contributions to the built environment so that we can all enjoy that. So again, that's kind of from like a coach perspective or from a curatorial perspective. I think that goes a long ways, like kind of getting the team kind of going one way, or working towards the same goal, I think is the thing. So I don't know. Do I have to have an actual, like a hashtag statement? Is that what you're
No, you don't. No. And it's funny because I have had a couple of guests react that way. Well, I don't want to take over the world. And I see it more as my world. I want to take over my world. And how do I want to make my best world? And
Yeah.
and so that's the idea behind the world. That I don't want to take over the world either. I've got plenty on my plate already. But I also love that you said that, making those little differences that maybe nobody will ever notice, but impacts them, and they don't even realize it. Those little things often make the biggest ripples. They often affect the most people. You'll never hear about it. But there are things we all do every day that we'll never hear about, but you've impacted somebody's life in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. I have like a funny thing in my head about like, be nice to the built environment. It'll be nice to you. Like, be nice to the environment means like, do the work and spend the time and, create a great project. And on the financial side, put good money into a project and build things that make sense. But be nice to the built environment. And I think the benefits that it will be nice back to you is kind of the way of like, good energy in, good energy out kind of thing. But it's pretty basic, I guess.
I love that. I'm going to
not
try to
domination.
remember to use that when I record the intro.
Yeah.
Be nice. Clay, thank you so much for joining me today and talking to me about this great building. I love this building. I want you to know that. The minute I saw it, I'm like, that's the one I want to talk about. I really appreciate you taking a good chunk of your day out to talk to me, and hopefully you can come back a little bit down the road and share another project with us.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. We've been fans of the podcast for quite a while, so excited to join in and meet you in person. And love the format and would love to do another one someday. So thank you for inviting us.
Well, we'd love to have you back.
Yeah.